Welcome to a Healthy Living video blog at workoutmaster.com. This is Ruben.
This is Aram.
We're going to talk about fat today. I don't know, for some reason out of all macronutrients, the fat is just this topic of intense conversation. What's good, what's bad. People really dislike fat. Some people love fat. So let's talk a little bit more about fat. Not that we have not enough of fat episodes altogether.
Well, we have one more. Let's put it that way. Yes, I say that you're absolutely right about that. It's the one that's the most vilified or demonized, whichever way you want to call it, and is the one that people tend to cut the most when it comes down to creating something.
Yeah, it's always like if you have extra fat, you think the fat is guilty one. You just go for it. What do you think is guilty?
Because people think fat makes you fat.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, protein can make you fat, and carbohydrate can make you fat, and drinking water possibly could make you fat too. If that's the case, I don't know. I just threw that one out there. If anybody has a problem, they can.
That would be a wild guess.
that would be it. So I'll call it a wag. So a wild ass guess. The important thing to realize is that you need to consume fat, and plenty of it. Now, the one thing that I would like to make more of an impact on is the quality of fat and the kind of fat that you eat. Obviously, quality has to be always paramount, because you don't want to eat the storages that an animal might have in reserve that actually were tainted or poisoned by chemicals, by all kinds of other crap that actually can affect you negatively. However, when you actually have good qualities of fat around, like we all have, it's not to say, well, I live in a part of the country, that's bullshit. Everybody has access to good quality fats if they actually put a little bit of homework behind it and do a little bit of footwork. It's important that you realize that there has to be a proper amount of fat that you eat. And when I talk about fat, I can assure you that unless I use the word PUFA or monosaturated or polyunsaturated fats, when I talk about fat, since it's the only kind of fat that I want to put into my body, it's always going to be saturated from a grass-fed, free-range animal.
Or
coconut, of course. Otherwise, to me, the word fat doesn't simplify anything else. It just means that.
For me, it's amazing that to this point, I do quite a lot of nutrition counseling, and people always surprised when I say they need to include more fat in the diet. I mean, it's just such a big topic, and it is very important. Unless you include fat in your diet, you're not going to create satisfaction. If you're not going to create satisfaction, you will always be hungry, and if you're going to be hungry at some point, you are going to eat. There's no kidding really in that area. So if you're going to eat, you're going to pack on more weight, and guess what? The lack of fat can make you fat just as easily as overconsumption of fat. Now, the key is to consume a right fat, and as we talked many times, saturated fat, in our opinion, is probably one of the best fats, even though it's been demonized by industries and by
for decades,
institutions and whatever it is, whatever the reasons are behind it. I personally don't care. What I care about is I care about my health, and I care about the health of people that I love, and therefore I'll always recommend for them to eat saturated fat.
Absolutely. Realize that without the use of saturated fat, your body's not going to have the resources to produce the hormones that are required for your efforts in order to actually have the energy to be able to exercise or to lose the body fat that you're so much in disagreement with.
Plus, if you don't have enough of fat, your body does not have building blocks to create all kinds of other things that your body needs.
Absolutely.
So if you don't give the body the building blocks, it cannot construct the body that you would want. Therefore, you will be the one responsible for whatever the body that you live in. If you don't like how it looks, guess what? That's because you're not providing enough of parts for that particular body. I always say you cannot build a 5-star hotel with a cheap motel parts. You really have to invest in the proper parts.
Interesting analogy. However, the other point that I would like to make is that if you don't eat enough saturated fat, you're always going to feel hungry, and the effort to create satiety is never going to happen. So what happens is that you tend to overeat in the other categories that you think that are okay and that the body actually makes better use of it, carbohydrate for energy and protein for building muscle. But guess what? Without fat, saturated fat, you cannot convert that protein into much, and without that saturated fat, your body will not make good use of those carbohydrates, so you get caught on a catch-22 that always the person that does not benefit is you.
There's one thing that people have a hard time is they don't know how to include fat in the diet. So there's a few different ideas I would want to give you. One way to include the fat in your diet is to consume full-fat dairy. That's number one, especially if it's organic, made from grass-fed cows, low pasteurized or raw. Now the other way is to cook in the fat. So let's say if you have to saute something, then you can use either butter or coconut oil, sometimes olive oil, or whatever you prefer, and that will be a good source of. With the olive oil, it will be monounsaturated fatty acids, but with the butter and the coconut oil will be a saturated fat. And the third, I would generally reserve it as a last approach. You can just take either a pill in the pill form, let's say coconut oil in the pill form, or you can just take a spoon of coconut oil and just jug it like that if you're a trooper.
If you're a trooper, absolutely. But you can always, when you make shakes or the other forms of food that you would eat on a daily basis, it's very easy to add the dairy and it's very easy to add the coconut oil. So there's no excuse for not eating enough saturated fat or thinking that it's not appealing enough that when you cook it, when you prepare food, it's going to stand out too much and it's going to make the taste of that food actually taste worse. Quite the opposite. When you add fat to food, it tastes better. And if you don't believe me, do the practice yourself.
Exactly. Anything you want to add?
Everything tastes better with a little fat on top of it and some salt. Salt and taste all the time.
How much that possesses? Ruben always has a little
I
salt.
love salt. I love salt, and I use massive amounts of salt, and it's actually working out pretty good for me, actually.
All right. Anything else you want to say about fat?
Have a good day.
All right, guys. Your future looks better already. Thank you very much for watching, and until the next time.